the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show, and thanks for joining me this evening. Kind of a last minute decision to have a show tonight. We'll make it short because Celtics are playing Milwaukee at 8 o'clock, and I want to go see the Celtics win. At least that's what I hope. All right, I'll be taking Super Chat questions today, so if you have any, prepare for them. Prepare Super Chat questions on YouTube. But I want to talk about Facebook, and I want to talk about capitalism a little bit. We're going to be talking a lot about capitalism. I have a feeling this election season and just generally the state of debates in America today requires it. But let's start with Facebook, and of course, Facebook and capitalism are related. So Facebook announced, I think it was today, that they are banning a whole slew of people from their platform. They are taking them off. Louis Farrakhan, who is the leader of the Nation of Islam, Alex Jones, Laura Loomer, who I've never heard of, but I guess a conservative Jewish activist, a pro-white politician, Paul Nehlen, Milo, of course, and Paul Joseph Watson, who is a conspiracy theorist, have all been banned today from Facebook. And I mean, I don't like any of these people, but I think it's a mistake for Facebook to get involved in banning them. I think it's Facebook treating us like children, telling its customers that they can't, make choices for themselves, that they can't make kind of decisions for themselves. Now, I don't know exactly where their line is. I would certainly ban certain people, and I've said this before, I don't think it's easy to decide where the line is exactly. But I mean, I find this a little ridiculous. I mean, Milo's an obnoxious jerk. Anybody who peddles conspiracy theories is pretty obviously peddling conspiracy theories. And any intelligent person would know this and avoid them, just ignore them. The idea that Facebook is not going to police is the wrong word, determine who on the fringes is okay and who is not, who is on the fringe. I'm probably on the fringe for Facebook in many regards. On the issues, for example, of Islam, I might be as radical as some of these people that have been banned, although they banned a lot of other people. Let people make choices about these things. Let individuals decide about these things. Have clear guidelines. I've been talking about this for a while. Clear, objective guidelines of what you can and cannot do on Facebook, what you can and cannot say on Facebook. And if people violate them, fine, get rid of them. And maybe all of these people have violated the terms, but it strikes me that if that's the case, the terms are too narrow. And again, it's not to defend anything any of these people have said. I mean, Louis Farrakhan is despicable. Alex Jones is despicable. I don't really know the rest. Milo is just ridiculous. I don't take Milo particularly seriously. But if Facebook wanted to treat its customers as adults, it would let them make these kind of decisions and not try to make a decision for us, for the users, for the customers. So I think it's sad. And this is only going to increase calls to regulate Facebook, and the calls are coming from the left and the calls are coming from the right for somewhat different reasons. But, my guess is that a bunch of leftists have been banned here, although the predominant number of people on the right, which brings up an interesting question, right? There are a lot of people out there who say, Yaron, right means pro-individual rights, free market people. And left means the statists, all of them, every single one of them. So if that were right, if that were true, right? If that's how you want to define left and right, then how would you define Alex Jones? Would you say he's on the left? But then nobody would know what you were talking about. And is Alex Jones the same in that sense as Louis Farrakhan? I mean, maybe their views at the end of the day are very similar, but they attract completely different people coming from completely different kind of backgrounds, orientations, perspectives. There's something different about them. What would you do with white nationalists? Are they on the left? Are they on the right? Well, if statists are on the left, then they'd be on the left. But are they the same as kind of communists focused on so-called economic injustice? No, I mean, I think there are differences between statists of the left and statists of the right. And today, almost everybody on the left and on the right are statists. And it's useful to talk about left and right, not to talk about left and right in terms of left are the bad guys, right are the good guys, but between left and right is two forms of evil, two forms of statism, two forms of bad. One more focused on, Marxist ideologies, and in the more modern trend, identity politics and postmodernism, and the other more focused on nationalism, of statism with a nationalist bent to it, on racism, on anti-Semitism, but just broadly kind of statism that's focused on the nation or the race or some other category. But there's usefulness in separating the different types of statists. And given the popular usage of left and right, that's what left and that's what right is. And me at least, I don't know about you guys, but I am neither left nor right. I'm an individualist. I'm not a statist of the left. I'm not a collectivist of the left. I'm not a statist collectivist of the right either. I am neither left nor right. Those categories, have lost all meaning in the modern context. Maybe they never had meaning. I don't know. But they certainly don't have meaning today in pro-individual rights versus anti-individual rights. That's out. We're the pro-individual rights people. I am anyway. And everybody else is anti. Of the people that are anti, some fall into the bucket of left and some fall into the bucket of right. That's the way I use the terms today. I'm claiming, somebody's asking what I'm claiming. I'm claiming Alex Jones is a statist, nationalist, racist, conspiracy theorist, general wacko of the right. Maybe I'm wrong about one of those particulars. Maybe he's not a nationalist. Maybe he's not a racist. I don't know. But he's a wacko of the right. I think there's no question about that. So Facebook, I think Facebook is wrong to do this. I think it's bad for its customers and it's bad politically for its image. I think it has succumbed to pressure primarily from certain leftist groups, primarily from people who are concerned with hate speech, people who are concerned with so-called hate speech, people who are concerned with people's feelings, people who are concerned with kind of the leftist agenda of silencing voices. And it's sad that it's succumbed to that. On the other hand, and I have to reiterate, it has every right to do it. Their platform. They get to decide who's on it. If they drop me tomorrow, they drop me tomorrow. It's their platform. They get to decide. I don't have a long-term contract with Facebook. I've not signed anything with them. I agree to their terms and conditions. I think I fulfill them, but there's no binding contract here. Their platform, their property rights, their freedom to decide who is in their platform and who is not. As a business decision, as a political decision, and unfortunately, in modern American economic life, we have to consider as business owners, we have to consider the political consequences of what we do. I think at the end of the day, a bad decision, a decision that's going to lead to further pressure, further discussion, further engagement in the idea of breaking them up, and I would not be surprised at all if you'll see a coalition of Republicans and Democrats with Donald Trump supporting them to go after the social media companies and break them up. Right, break them up. Oh my God! Somebody on YouTube put me in 3 brackets. You know that 3 brackets connotes a Jew. Yeah, guess what? I'm actually Jewish. Okay, so that's what I have to say about Facebook. I've talked a lot about it in the past. If you have specific questions about Facebook, I'm happy to answer them. But I think it really is, as I said, bad business decision. But this is not censorship. Only the government can censor. You can only censor by use of force. You can only censor. Only the government has the ability to censor you. Not allowing somebody to use your platform within their rights. Might not be a right decision, might not be a good decision, might not even be a moral decision, but certainly within their rights legally, and therefore they should be left alone. All right, let me see. I'll get to super chats in a second. Somebody's asking me if I can do a video on public speaking and debating. So let me announce here that in July, I'm going to be doing a seminar on public speaking rather than doing a video, because I don't think you can get much from a video. I'm going to do a seminar on public speaking and debating, or particularly public speaking. And it's going to be in Miami. It's going to be live. I'm going to accept 10 to 15 people. I'm not going to take more than 15 people at the seminar. But it will be an intense Friday, Saturday, Sunday, start Friday evening, Saturday, and then half of Sunday at a hotel in Miami, just doing public speaking. And you'll get to practice, I'll get to critique, and I'll give you my thoughts on the principles involved in public speaking. So anybody interested in that, I will be distributing information about it. It will cost money. It'll be about $1,500. It won't be about. It'll be exactly $1,500 for the weekend. And hopefully we can get 10, 15 people who are interested in improving their public speaking abilities to come and take the course. All right, let's see. Let's get some of these. Let's get some of these questions. Upton asks, in a country with unilateral free trade, would it be legitimate to use military force against other countries that impose tariffs? No, I don't think it would be. So the only reason to use unilateral force, unilateral military force, is in self-defense. I don't think tariffs are an attack on you, right? That needs the response of military force, of self-defense through force. Tariffs are attacks on the people in the country where the tariffs are imposed. So if the United States imposes tariffs on China, it's a tax on Americans. It's not the initiation of force against China. It's initiation of force against Americans. And Americans should rebel against it. And Americans did rebel against taxes in the War of Independence in 1776. But today we don't rebel about taxes, and tariffs are one of the more minor taxes that we pay. But tariffs are tax on the people on which they are imposed. And in that sense, they are force inflicted on those people. And no, it's inappropriate to use military force in the context of tariffs, right? Or in the context of subsidies, or in the context of anything that distorts a local economy. A foreign power does not have a right to violate the autonomy of that country in the name of the economic violation of rights within the country. In and of itself, the violation of economic rights does not impose a threat to the other country that's exporting to you. So I'm all for unilateral free trade. That is unilateral, zero tariffs. Unilateral, zero tariffs is what I'm for. I think that would put pressure on other countries to ultimately have bilateral free trade, and I think bilateral free trade is a winner, win-win kind of situation where everybody benefits from, and is the only moral, trade policy that exists. So absolutely unilateral free trade, but that, other countries' tariffs are not force against you. Are not force against their own citizens again, not force against you. All right, wow, lots of super chat. Let's see. Action Jackson asks, what is your opinion of Farrakhan historically and today? I mean, Farrakhan is a nut. He's a bad man. He's a racist, an anti-Semite. He is a economically horrific. He is an immoral, bad human being who has advocated for horrific, evil ideas. He is anti-American. He is anti-Western civilization in fundamental terms. And, the very fact that he wants to establish, if you will, a nation of Islam in America tells you everything you need to know about him in the sense of how inappropriate he is for America and how wrong he is and how offensive his views are. So, Islam is not a value around which to build a nation. The hatred of America is obviously evil and wrong and wrongly played. I mean, one of the his anti-Semitism is just horrific. It's he hates Jews. He's racist in other ways. He's just a bad guy, and he attracts a group of followers. I don't think that group of followers is significantly increased. And no, it's he's not a good guy. All right, and I don't think there's any difference. I think historically he doesn't play a big role, and I think today he plays even a smaller role. So I think the Nation of Islam, if anything, has declined in its influence over time. Upton says, I think tariff could be seen as force against the private parties exporting. No. It could be seen as force against the private parties importing, but not against those exporting. And the importing parties are under the jurisdiction of the government that imposed the tariffs. All right. Do you think the tech industry, to give you an example, if you decide not to pay your tariffs, I'm not going to pay tariffs. Who arrests you? Your government arrests you. And who is you? You are the importer, not the exporter. The person who pays the tariff is the importer. They're the ones who get arrested if they don't pay it. Do you think the tech industry ought to have an equivalent of what Alex Epstein does for energy? Someone trying to educate them on objectivist ethics? Yeah, absolutely. I think every industry should have the equivalent. It's hard because some industries are more open and some industries are less open to having somebody like Alex come in and try to educate them. But every industry should do it. Every industry should have somebody like that. And hopefully that, in every industry, it's going to take slightly different tactics and strategy to get in. But yes, I would love to see dozens of Alex Epsteins in every single industry out there defending that industry on moral grounds and bringing the objectivist ethics into it. What are your thoughts on the late Robert Nozick and his book, Anarchy State and Utopia? I'm not an expert on Nozick, and I read the book a long time ago. Nozick was one of the better philosophers out there. I think he's one of the few who treats Ayn Rand with respect, although I think he like many others, ultimately doesn't get Ayn Rand, it doesn't understand Ayn Rand, and sets up as a consequence, doesn't really critique her ideas as they really are. And I think it's a missed opportunity. But of all the kind of philosophers out there who delved into free market, libertarian, objectivist kind of material, Nozick was one of the better ones, and I think is worth reading if you're interested in philosophy and if you're interested in these kind of ideas. What do you think is the age a child becomes an adult? This includes the age of consent, drinking, drugs, driving, military, enlistment. I mean, I think first the age should be the same for all those. I think it's probably somewhere around 17 or 18. I think a government has to set an age and then allow for exceptions, because some people mature faster. So I would set the age as 18 and then say, if you believe that you're mature enough to do all these things at an age younger than 18, you can appeal to a judge and you can get an exception, an exclusion from the laws limiting your access to alcohol, drugs, military, and stuff like that. But you would have to go in front of a judge to prove it. So I recognize the fact that people mature at different ages. There isn't one age in which all children become adults, but you have to set some kind of threshold and then allow for exceptions. You could also make the case that parents should be able to go in front of a judge and say the 18-year-old isn't old enough to be able to do this, and they would have to prove immaturity or something. But so they have to be some objective criteria of what level of maturity is required in order to do all these things so that the law allows them. But I think that's doable. I don't think any of that is particularly difficult, but that's what you need a legal system for, is to establish these nuances. There's one age in the law, but there are many ages in reality, and you need to give the law the flexibility to adapt to those many ages. Man, what are you guys doing? You guys think I know everything? I'm getting all these questions about stuff out of nowhere. Thoughts on the Theocritus trap? Wow, I don't know what the Theocritus trap is. Will China threaten the U.S. or other Western countries militarily in the future? I mean, that's a pretty open-ended question. I don't know what the in the future means. Is that the next 20 years, the next 100 years, the next 1,000 years? I don't know. I would say that in the next 20 years, it's very unlikely that China will threaten militarily U.S. and Western countries. I think for a number of reasons. One is China is too poor to do it in a significant way. It just doesn't have the technology to do it. I think that the trends in China towards more authoritarianism, which would lead them to be more aggressive, are also trends that are going to lead to China becoming less wealthy, and because authoritarianism leads to lack of creativity and ultimately destruction economically. So I think China is not on the ascend but on a descend. I think economic growth in China is not declining. The rate of growth is declining, and the reason is that so much freedom has been taken away from the Chinese. That is, we're going through a period right now, the last 3 or so years, where freedom in China is shrinking. And I think that will mean economic success in China will shrink, which means they won't get as wealthy as fast as they think, which means their military buildup is going to have to wait significantly. And they have a lot of internal pressures. They have a lot of internal challenges, which involve, for example, the fact that many people, hundreds of millions of people are still poor. These people want to become middle class. If the Chinese economy stutters, how do they become middle class? What facilitates that? Nothing really facilitates it. So China is facing a lot of challenges unless it decides to free up its economy, allow for more political and economic freedom in a dramatic way. And free countries, I don't worry about free countries from a military perspective because I don't think they are threats. So one path is it becomes freer and therefore is not a threat to the United States. The other path is become authoritarian. But as it becomes authoritarian, it becomes less powerful militarily and it becomes less of a threat to the United States. The United States has such a military technological advantage over the military forces of the Chinese and the Russians that I really do not think we have anything to worry about. Also, both of the regimes in China and in Russia are regimes that are not interested in committing suicide. We're not going to get into a nuclear war with China. Because the Chinese don't want to die. So I don't think China's a big military threat. Now, the one threat that I can see happening is China getting into economic trouble and China invading Taiwan to distract people. And then the question is, does the U.S. go to war with China to protect Taiwan based on its treaties, or doesn't it? Or does it just, in a sense, give Taiwan to the Chinese? I think given the fact that China is a nuclear power, I think at the end of the day, the United States folds and lets China have Taiwan. We impose sanctions. We don't have trade with them. We shake our finger at them. But I don't think we actually go to war. So I think and I don't think the Chinese are interested in war. I think they're interested in expanding their scope of influence in Asia. I think they want to be the dominant power in Asia. I certainly think they are very, very motivated to expand their economic ability, because they've got this hundreds of millions of people who are poor, who they want to bring out of poverty, and they're afraid of revolution if they don't bring them out of poverty. And I just don't see them as a military threat to the United States, and indeed their economic interests. They, I think, understand better than many in the West that their economic interests are tied to trade, they're tied to keeping the shipping lanes open, they're tied to, indeed, the success of the West and the United States as trading partners with China, and that they don't win from war. So I just don't see it. And Chinese history is not a history of military expansion, particularly not beyond certain borders. I mean, you could see them getting into a war with Vietnam. You can see them getting into a war with Taiwan. You can see them getting into a war, maybe even with Russia over, I don't know, mineral rights in Mongolia or something. But I don't see them getting into a war with the West in the 20 years into the future. Beyond that, I cannot make predictions. Thoughts on philosopher Mortimer Adler. Don't know enough about him to comment. As the progressive left, communism, socialism, values, and ideas is on the rise, shouldn't you be behind Trump? Or do you believe they're equally bad? I believe that whether they're equally bad or not, Trump is not the antidote to it. Trump is emboldening socialism and communism. Trump will make socialism and communism become more popular in this country. Socialism is on the rise in America today to a large extent as a response to Trump. Trump doesn't help the cause. Trump lays the foundation for the left to take over and emboldens them and encourages people to support them. So no, Trump is not the solution to the left. Trump is almost as bad as many on the left. And in his nature, in his character, and in his policies, he emboldens and encourages the left to do what they do. Right? So, I mean, too many people out there are blinded by the hatred of the left and are willing to form coalitions with anybody in order to attack the left. But then what will happen when you succeed? The left is crushed. You won't have a voice anymore because you will be not a capitalist. Who the hell? You're not a capitalist. You're a supporter of Donald Trump. You are on the Donald Trump bandwagon. You won't have a voice for capitalism. And then you will leave the statists on the right free of all opposition. We won't be able to be opposition because we were with them. We formed a coalition with them. So you make yourself impotent for the future battle we're going to have with the right. by getting into bed with the right in order to defeat the left. But let me be clear, the long-term danger from the right is just as deep as the long-term danger from the left. There are no communists today in politics, just like there are no fascists today in politics. There are people leaning towards communism, certainly towards socialism on the left, towards their, but even the socialists, they're not real socialists. There are very few of them who would actually nationalize the means of production. But they're leaning in that direction. They're moving in that direction. It's true there are no fascists on the right, and Trump is not a fascist, but he's leaning in that direction. He flirts in that direction. He legitimizes that direction. And you're telling me that you would get into bed with somebody leaning fascist in order to defeat somebody leaning socialist or leaning communist? No, no, no. The only coalition you can form is an anti-Trump, anti-left coalition. A coalition that says never socialism and never Trump. Never socialism and never fascism and anybody leaning towards authoritarianism and fascism. That's the only coalition you can form. A coalition based on freedom, not a coalition based on, I'm just going to violate some of your rights some of the time. And long term, I want to violate more of your rights, but right now we're fighting socialists, so I'll only violate a few of your rights in the meantime. Give me a break. You do not, when the evils are evil, you do not choose the lesser of two evils. When the evils are really evil, and when it's hard to tell what the lesser of two evils is, because you don't know the long-term consequences. And when one evil like Trump is going to bring about the other evil, which is socialism, I mean, look at what he did this week. $2 trillion, what do you call it? Infrastructure plan for the U.S. government. $2 trillion. You want to get in bed with that? To fight whom? Who's opposed to it? Who are you going to fight? AOC? AOC loves the idea. This is straight out of MMT. Let's print up $2 billion and do it. Oh yeah, I know. Trillion, not billion. I know Trump says he's going to do it, private-public partnerships. That's the worst. It's worse to do public-private partnerships than have the government do it by themselves. Because public-private partnerships is fascism. It's the road to fascism. It means there is no private enterprise anymore. It means government is involved even in the private property, even in where there's supposedly an island of freedom, private property. Now government is involved there. Right. I was fighting socialists before some of you were born. And I was fighting socialists before Trump was elected. And I will continue to fight socialists till my last days. But what Trump has done is emboldened the socialists and expanded their influence. And if you can't see that you're blind. That Trump makes an AOC possible. You're blind. You fight the socialists and you fight Trump. You fight statism. You fight evil wherever it happens to be, left or right. You don't team up with Stalin to fight Hitler. Massive mistake that FDR made. And you don't team up with Hitler to fight Stalin. Sometimes evils are evil, and you don't choose the lesser of two. And I think Trump is evil enough so that you don't work with him, even against a common enemy like socialism. And particularly when you see the kind of rise of white nationalism and racism and anti-Semitism, all in the last few years, all, under the big umbrella that is the supporters of Trump. I'm not going in that umbrella or anywhere near that umbrella. And I'm going to call that umbrella what it is, which is anti-freedom, anti-individualism, anti-America. I mean, Trump is an anti-American president. Greg mentions the fact that if you want to know more about Nozick, there is an essay in this book. I haven't read it yet. That's why I didn't comment more extensively. If I'd read it, I might have been able to comment on it. Foundations of Free Society. But there's an essay by Onkar Ghate on Nozick, in the book. So I encourage you all to get the book. You can get it on Amazon. And if Ankar wrote it, I'm sure it's an excellent essay. I'll be reading it soon. I'm studying the book, and I'm looking forward to reading. I've read some of the essays. I'm looking forward to completing the book. All right. What is the likelihood that the nukes of other countries actually work? U.S. budgets $20 billion a year on nuclear arsenal maintenance, but the entire Russian military budget is $70 billion, and burdened with lack of freedom. I think there's a good chance they don't work, particularly the Russian ones. Chinese maybe are better, but even the Chinese ones. I mean, one of the things I've said about North Korea is I don't think the nukes could hit anything, even if they developed them. Guidance systems are not easy. Developing rocket technology and guiding a rocket like that is not easy, and it's unlikely North Korea could do it. I think the same thing about Iran. The probability that an Iranian missile carrying a nuclear warhead could hit Israel is very small. I think it's much more likely to fall in the Mediterranean or fall in Jordan, or to be knocked down by a missile defense system. And I think missile defense systems are enough to protect us against Iran and North Korea. My expectation is, my experience with Russian weapons is that with one exception, the AK-47, which is an excellent piece of equipment. But my experience with Russian tanks, Russian artillery, even Russian planes, is that they're just never as good as the hype. And they don't match up even close to American weaponry or Western weaponry. My guess is that the same is true of the Russian nuclear arsenal, that most of it won't launch. The ones that do launch, some of them won't hit target. The Russians are probably afraid of launching their own weapons because who knows where they'll hit and where they'll land. So, yes, I agree with you, Upton. I think that the weapon systems are probably in very bad shape. And the lack of freedom makes it very difficult for them to maintain it, to update the technology, to bring in the latest technology, to make sure they work, to do the right kind of testing. All of that under authoritarianism is very difficult to do, and likely to fail. Do you see, somebody says socialism has been on the rise for 100 years. I mean, that's funny. That's funny, given that Berlin Wall just fell, 25 years ago? Socialism was declared dead, was on the decline, was crushed, was finished. What's been on the rise for 100 years in America is statism, is government intervention in the economy in all its forms. But socialism was on the brink of defeat following the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it has made, and even in Europe, I remember Mitterrand in the 1980s. He was a socialist. He was elected as a socialist and immediately flipped because his policies were such a disaster and he couldn't sustain it. So he abandoned socialism. Right? I mean, think about the Labour Party in England. It used to have socialist statements in its constitution, and 10 years ago, 15 years ago, under Tony Blair, they took all that stuff out because they didn't want to be associated with socialism anymore. And now, look who's there. Now, we've got a socialist running the Labour Party, a real socialist running the Labour Party in England. We got socialism on the rise in a way that nobody expected just 15 years ago, given the fall of the Berlin Wall, given the demise of socialist parties. I mean, think of it. In Italian elections in the past, the Communist Party was always on the verge of victory. Never actually won, but always with a significant member of the parliament in Italy. The same with several European countries. There is no Communist Party of Italy anymore. So no, socialism, quasi-socialism, has been on decline for the last 100 years, over the last, 50 years. What's been on the rise is statism, and statism knows no restrictions of left and right. What we're seeing now is statism on the right dominating this country, and that is encouraging statism on the left, which is socialism, to get more and more bolder and to become more and more substantial. If you don't think the left, just like the alt-right was a response to identity politics, you don't think the left is going to respond to the right. Right and left respond to each other. And as one becomes more statist, the other one becomes even more statist. Do you see a free country being created on Mars? Oh, I wish. I wish. I don't, unfortunately, because I don't think, unless we have some free countries in this country and some inclination towards free countries in this country, then Mars is going to be infected by the same ideological, political, but primarily ideological disease that we have when colony is established there. Have some Norwegian welfare oil money. You have, I have. Do you want to give me some? Oh, you're giving me some through Super Chat. Thank you for your Norwegian welfare oil money. I really appreciate that. Norway is a very rich country because of its Norwegian oil money. It'd be interesting if that oil ever runs out, what happens in Norway. Have you seen Lord of the Rings trilogy? Yes. I mean, I enjoyed the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's amazing movie making in a sense of just the grandeur and the spectacle and the action and the and the good versus evil. I don't particularly like the story. I don't think the story is that interesting. It's filled with magic and filled with all kind of nonsense and magic rings. I think I like the fact that the heroes have to make choices and the choices are hard to make. And they're challenged by those choices. So I enjoyed the movies. I enjoyed more than anything. I enjoyed the spectacle of it, and the black and white, and the heroism, and that the heroes were basically had to make choices about it. Ask Yaron if he prefers GOT to LOR. I don't know what GOT or LOR. Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, The Lord of the Rings. Wow. I prefer Game of Thrones. But because I think Game of Thrones is more intellectual, and it's more. There are more themes that I find interesting in Game of Thrones. I find Game of Thrones more interesting, and I find Game of Thrones. I don't know, because it's longer. I like the long format. And I'm not a huge fan of Star Wars. Somebody's asking. I'm not a huge fan of Star Wars. Too simplistic, too childish. But I think Game of Thrones has a lot of interesting themes. I want to do a review of Game of Thrones, but I'm wary of doing it without watching it again because there's a lot of fascinating content in there. Anyway, and I like the long format. I really, really like the long format. All right, let's see. Okay, I'm going to take these two. Let's see, these two more super chat questions. Why did Germany enter a recession? What does it mean? I'm not exactly sure why Germany entered a recession. I basically think that the recession in Germany is probably a consequence of the inability of Germany to adapt quickly to a changing global economy. So I think labor laws that are still too tight, although there was a huge labor law reform in the early 2000s that made Germany much better than it used to be. I think Germany is still too slow in responding to supply and demand in global markets. And when China slowed, I think that caused Germany to slow. And the U.S. slowed late last year. The U.S. economy slowed a bit, so that affected, I think, Germany. But I also think that what's going on is that the central bank, the European Central Bank, through its various bizarre policies since the financial crisis, has basically been subsidizing Southern Europe, primarily Spain, Italy, Greece, at the expense of Germany. And the cost of that, I think basically the cost of that, the malinvestments the bad investments and the distorted investments, the bad allocation of capital that are being driven by the policies of the European Central Bank have basically caused Germany a lot of harm. I'll mention one other thing. Now, again, I'm not an expert on German economy, so I would have to really look at the numbers and study it more carefully. But one thing that I know is a fact is Germany's energy policy has been basically insane, right? Basically insane. Because what Germany has done over the last 10 years under Merkel is it's phased out all its nuclear power plants with the goal of reducing carbon emissions, although that works in reverse, and is invested heavily and subsidized, heavily subsidized. Solar and wind. And the fact is that solar and wind cannot replace nuclear. So what has happened is the cost of energy has gone up dramatically in Germany. And the cost of energy and the availability of energy has become constrained. That's partially what has driven up the cost. So German energy costs are no longer competitive with even its European neighbors, never mind other countries around the world, which is driving up the cost of its products. Now, to kind of, in a sense, solve this problem, what Germany is doing now is it's restarting its old coal plants. Coal, yes, coal. The dirtiest of all, forms of energy, modern energy production. Dirtiest in terms of, at least in terms of CO2. So CO2 is actually rising in Germany because they basically converted nuclear into useless windmills and solar panels. And because of that, they now have to re-engage coal plants. So that could be part of it. So basically bad investments all around. Bad investment by government, bad investment by private sector because of distortions in money and monetary policy caused by the central bank. Central planning doesn't work. Doesn't work. Doesn't work for energy. Doesn't work for money. It does not work, and it creates massive incentives, distortions. It creates massive distortions because it creates massive misallocation of decision making. So the decision maker is not the valuer. The decision maker is not the person evaluating with a value proposition, the marketplace, but it's a bureaucrat making decisions for other people. Instead of individuals making decisions for themselves, both on the production side and on the consumption side. It's not entrepreneurs building products they believe that are going to be good for their customers and that their customers are going to want to buy. It's some bureaucrat deciding what entrepreneurs should be building based on some social utility function that is non-existent. And therefore, it's all distorted. So I'm not surprised Germany's in a recession. I think Europe generally can have a fast-growing economy because it has put so many constraints on its markets and on its industrialists, on its entrepreneurs. Okay, Upton asked, did Ayn Rand ever comment on the similarity between her reinventing philosophy to write novels and Gold reinventing physics to create his engine? Not that I know of. So what you mean by reinventing is coming up with a completely new theory in philosophy in order to be able to write her novels. And Gold, in a sense, coming up with a new theory in physics, a completely new ideas in physics to create his engine. I don't think, not that I know of, put it that way. If somebody on one of the chats knows something better, I will, but I don't know of any place where she mentions that. All right, one other, I want to comment. I'm going to do this quickly because I've got about 10 minutes. One of the things that I think is so horrific going on right now, and again, one of the things I think that Trump makes it harder to deal with, is the massive attack on capitalism that is happening everywhere. It's just the last few weeks have been particularly bad. I think Ray Dalio's attack on capitalism and the idea that we need to redo capitalism has just opened up this world now where everybody is commenting, everybody is writing about this. and what capitalism is and what it isn't, and how we fix it and how we change it and so on. It's just astounding. And let me give you an example of why Trump makes it harder to defend capitalism. He makes it harder because people associate him with capitalism. They think he's a pro-capitalist president. Now, let me read you from an op-ed. Where was the op-ed? This is an op-ed published in the Washington Post. President Trump embodies the Republican adultery, but it didn't begin with him. The adultery with wealth, with idealizing wealth creation, right? So the GOP has long been host. The GOP has been host to the virus of Arthur Ayn Rand's objectivism, a philosophy espoused in such tedious novels as Atlas Shrugged and a best-selling book of essays, The Virtue of Selfishness. Russian-born Rand suffered from a condition common to young and European philosophers, to young people and European philosophers, namely the will to believe that a single system can explain the whole world. Rand's system, a response to the destructive system of fascism and communism, maintained that humans are responsible only to themselves. Obligations to community are simply forms of oppression. It is not a big step from Atlas Shrugged to the collective Republican shrug upon learning that the tax dodge known as the Trump Foundation was a sham, charitably speaking. If the sham helped a rich man evade the tyranny of taxation, well, that's as noble as a service as any. And it goes on, again, to link this idea of wealth creation, this idea of Ayn Rand, this idea of objectivism with the Republican Party. Now, that is, and it connects it with the Kochs, which is horrible too, because the Kochs are not supporters of Trump, not supporters of the Republican Party. This whole connection of Ayn Rand with Trump, capitalism with the Republican Party, Ayn Rand with the Republican Party. And this is in the mainstream press, and much more people are reading this than are watching my podcast. That is a disaster for the future of the United States of America. It's a disaster for freedom. It is a disaster for capitalism. It'll make it impossible for us in the future to speak for capitalism. And that's the purpose of doing it. They know, many of these leftists know, that we are not supporters of the Republican Party, that we are not supporters of Trump. It doesn't matter to them. They know Trump is tainted. They know the Republican Party is tainted with statism, with authoritarianism, with lots of violations of individual rights. And they want to link that with Ayn Rand. And my responsibility, again, you do what you want to do. My responsibility, my job is to make clear that we stand separate, completely separate from the Republican Party, completely separate from Trump. Trump is not a capitalist. He wouldn't know what capitalism is. He doesn't know what capitalism is. He's never known what capitalism is. Yeah, he's maybe a good businessman. Being a good businessman does not make you a capitalist in an ideological sense. Being a capitalist as an economic agent does not make you a capitalist in an economic, philosophical sense. Our job is to defend capitalism as it should and could be, as it's never been. Capitalism, the unknown ideal. Not the capitalism of Ray Dalio, not the capitalism of Donald Trump, not the capitalism of Elizabeth Warren, not the capitalism of any of these people. We must separate ourselves from all of these groups, from all of these individuals, from all of these points of views. We must stand as the only people who stand for what capitalism really is and a proper moral defense of capitalism. And you can only do that if you stay pure, untainted by the likes of a Donald Trump, who wants to manage the economy, who wants to put tariffs on stuff, who wants to tell companies where they should open their plants and where they should close them, who wants to have a $2 trillion infrastructure plan, who wants socialized medicine. And that's some of the nicest things I can say about him. Right? Who claims to be an economic nationalist. Well, we're not nationalists. We're certainly not economic nationalists. We're capitalists. With a capital C. Completely different. Completely different than any of these people. And the more we're confused with them, the more damage we do to our own futures. The more damage we do to any prospect that capitalism will ever win. If you care about freedom, if you care about individual rights, if you care about your life, if you care about capitalism, proper capitalism. Capitalism is the system where the government protects individual rights, primarily property rights, and only protects individual rights. That is its sole responsibility. If you believe in a system like that, then I don't care who you vote for, but don't become a spokesman for Donald Trump. Don't get on here telling everybody how wonderful he is. Don't get in bed with him. Don't form alliances with him. Or for anybody in the Republican Party. Anybody in the Republican Party. Because there's nobody in the Republican Party, nobody, who stands for capitalism. I mean, maybe there are individuals. But as a party, it doesn't stand for that. And if you do vote for somebody, vote and say, okay, he's terrible, he's awful, here are all the bad things he does, but he's better than the alternative. I respect that position. But to defend his moronic actions and his even more moronic behavior and things he says and associate them with capitalism, with freedom, with individual rights, and God forbid with Ayn Rand, that is a sin you go to the 9th rung of hell for. All right, that's my rant for today. So stop this Trump stuff on my, I've said my piece on Trump, and, what do you think, you can convince me, really? But it's. I'm going to talk about this over the weekend. I want to talk more about this. What I want to talk about is capitalism. What I want to talk about is what capitalism is, and why the capitalism bashing is at such a height right now. All in the name, by the way, it's capitalist bashing. All in the name of we're going to save capitalism from itself. That's Ray Dalio. That's Elizabeth Warren. That's most of this stuff. The article that I was reading from says we shouldn't idealize wealth, but we shouldn't demonize it either. Look, we have to be reasonable about this. We have to be middle of the roaders here. We have to be, we want a little bit of capitalism. We just don't want too much of it because, really bad stuff happens. And I've got a bunch of these articles by businessmen who are saying, no, we need capitalism, just not too much. Just don't exaggerate. Don't be radical. So we're gonna talk about that, I think, tomorrow and Sunday. So tomorrow I'm gonna be doing a show. We'll do that. I'm not sure exactly what time. Probably 2 p.m. And we'll probably do a show on Sunday also at about 2 p.m. So hopefully you guys can join me at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Let your friends know. Let other people know. If you have particular topics you want me to talk about, then get on YouTube and use the super chat to guide me in the direction of those topics. If you have my email, you can also email me. And any kind of topics you would like covered in the next couple of days as we do shows over the weekend. All right, I'm going to go and watch some basketball. Hope that the Celtics win. Somebody asked, do I believe there will ever be an objectivist political party? Not an objectivist political party. I believe there'll be a capitalist political party. I believe there'll be a free markets. I believe there'll be individual rights political party. I don't think you name political parties after a philosophy. The political party should be divorced from the philosophy. It should be about politics, not about philosophy. So, and such a political party will exist one day, but it's going to be there is one. There's the capitalist political party, but a political party that actually wins votes, I think that's decades still in the future. All right, people. Talk to you over the weekend. Have a great weekend. Have a great Friday night. Enjoy. Bye, everybody.